a question. I understand why. It's always like a financial reason why they don't want to afford more GMs. But
Mhm.
I still think to this day that it was not worth the cut because I think the value that GMs bring to a game, the ability for people to jump in, speak to players directly.
So you understand what GMs are or were, right?
Well, tell me.
They're customer service agents. I mean, they're usually higher tier agents because, GMs usually have powers in game that they don't necessarily want to give to low level employees. But that's 9 times out of 10, that's exactly who they are. They're customer service agents. And they're usually in the game because they have to do something that has to happen in game, right? Some companies are good in that they allow, you to do back end changes from some sort of interface, which is way more effective as a way to do it, right? But there have certainly been plenty of examples of games where, well, the only way for me to get, gold back into this guy's inventory is for me to go in as a GM character, load my character with a ton of gold, and then gift it to them in game, right? Just for argument's sake.
Yeah.
That's a horribly ineffective way of doing that, but it might be the only way to do it. Um, there's certainly been examples of smaller games, particularly during betas, and I've been in these scenarios myself, where you might do in-game events and then run around and do stuff and have fun. And you hit the nail on the head. It is cost, unfortunately. The simple truth is it just doesn't scale, and I really wish it did. But the truth is that if you really wanted to do it properly, you would have to have an army of people, and you would probably have to charge an arm and a leg. And to be honest, it's actually surprising that no one has had this idea. And I mean, in like, Sony, or I don't even know who owns EverQuest now, but whoever still runs EverQuest, and then things like World of Warcraft. I mean, you mentioned like the different World of Warcraft modes and stuff. Why not have a GM run, kind of little slice of world? But you'd have to charge probably $100 or $200 a month in subs, but it would pay for those, additional people and that additional manpower. People kind of, it's easy to forget that World of Warcraft, EverQuest, and everything that, came from that, every single one of these things came from tabletop role playing games
Yeah.
with some board game and wargaming influence, sprinkled in there, right? WoW and EverQuest are a direct, well, themselves are both descended from things like NetHack and roguelikes, but doesn't matter. But they are both directly attempts to recreate the experience of a DM or GM sitting across a table from players, or as it is more often now, probably on a Zoom call with other players, and playing a game where they are directly interacting and the GM is thinking this stuff up on the fly, right? So what you're missing is that experience, right? Which is the thing of like, well, anything can happen, right? This GM can do anything. They could spawn monsters or do whatever else. What's been interesting to see for me, particularly in games like Roblox in the last couple of years, they're starting to allow that kind of experience again, right? Where somebody can come in and be like the admin and they can do funky stuff in the game. And I've seen streamers do it and that kind of stuff. And yeah, there's a reason why it's popular. It's fun, right? When you bring the
Yes.
human element into it, it's like, what's going to happen next? I don't really know, right? And that's the reason why D&D is still around after 50 years, right? And people still play it because that social and human side of it is kind of impossible to beat. I think the reason why we all enjoyed GMs, and I did too. I participated in end of beta events for games where we would go in as like you know major NPCs in the game and suddenly run around in their skins and have their powers, right? Which everybody loves because they're like, oh my God, this is the person who previously just stood there with an exclamation point and above their heads or whatever, and now they're running around and I can interact with them, right? An infamous example is poor Richard Garriott going into, I can't remember which Ultima, I guess it was probably Ultima Online, and they somehow managed to kill his character. And given that Lord British was supposed to basically kind of supposed to be God, that was a kind of amusing moment where like you didn't have your invincibility on, Richard. Um, but but yeah, that's the reason that we love this stuff. It's the reason that the why we remember it, and it's also the reason why a certain faction of players, particularly in MMOs and also just in multiplayer, don't want to do anything other than play multiplayer games because they feel like that playing against a human is infinitely better than playing against, an AI of any kind. Um, Me personally, I don't really tend to play a lot of games that are like directly competitive. So it's me versus a game system or whatever, right? Um, but obviously, if I'm going to play, I mean, with the exception of obviously the campaign type games, but I wouldn't really go into a Call of Duty or Battlefield or whatever and play a death match against a bunch of bots, right? Except as practice, right? That's just not going to be as much fun. So I think it just all really comes down to that. That's why GM events in MMOs were so popular. Was like, oh my god, suddenly it feels really different. And it's also why for a long time it was kind of like a holy grail of MMO developers, which was like, oh, we're going to make something where the world is going to change in response to player actions. And some people have done that. Some projects have been relatively successful in that, but that's also an amazingly difficult technical challenge, which is why not many games do it.